We continue now at the top of Daf Yomi Gemara Aleph and Meseches Rosh Hashana. This is Rosh Hashana Daf 13a. And the previous Amar Rav Asi said that if you have produce that grows 1/3 in the Shemitah year, so that's enough to be considered Shemitah produce. And that we learn out of a pasuk that refers to the sukkos that takes place in the 8th year. So now Rabbi Zera says to Rav Asi, V'dil malo ayil klal. Maybe the pasuk is talking about a situation where it didn't grow at all in the Shemitah year. Rashi over here says, V'dil malo ayil klal, va'afilo lo ischilo lehesbashel b'shvius. Even if you have a situation where it did not begin to ripen in the 7th year, ka'amar Rachmana, maybe the Torah is saying, mitzvahs shvius limashech isura ad chag HaSukkos. Maybe the Torah is saying that the mitzvahs that apply to Shemitah year go all the way until the holiday of Sukkos of the 8th year. Milach rosh v'liksor, meaning again, you're not allowed to plow, you're not allowed to harvest. Maybe that's really the meaning of the pasuk. The ka'amar Rachmana, the Torah is saying, tashmeit v'teizel ad chag HaSukkos, that the halachos of Shemitah apply until the holiday of Sukkos of the 8th year. And so the Gemara says, Lo salkadaituch, do not let that enter your mind. Rashi over here says, Lo salkadaituch de lishtoi kra, elo kasheviu shlish de mukach krachur. And it's clear from another pasuk, we're talking about a situation where we're referring to produce that has grown 1/3. Tichsiv, like the pasuk says, V'chag ha'osif, b'tseis Hashana talks about the chag ha'osif, the holiday of gathering at the end of the year, at the exit of the year. My osif, what's the reference over here to the gathering? If we're talking about the holiday that happens at the time that we gather in the produce, meaning the holiday of Sukkot, haksiv ba'aspecha, but the pasuk already says that. It already says ba'aspecha. Elamai asif katzir. Rather, what does asif mean? It really means katzir. It really means the harvest. V'kim lehu l'Rabbanan, and it was established, it was clear to the Rabbanan, t'chol tvua sheniktzera b'chag, that if you have any grain that was harvested on Chag, meaning at Sukkot time, b'yadua shehivia shlish lifnei Rosh Hashana, you know for sure that it grew by 1/3 before Rosh Hashana. So the pasuk's already indicating that we're talking about produce that grew 1/3 before Rosh Hashana. The kakari la b'tseis Hashana, and we're calling it b'tseis Hashana when the year ends, meaning again that produce becomes shayich, becomes relevant to the Shemitah year. And Rashi over here explains, v'chag ha'asif b'tseis Hashana, my chag ha'asif ilema dahu shem Sukkos. If what it means is just another name for Sukkos, umishum debab is man asifa, and it's just because it's the time of the gathering. So lamali dekasa b'chad kra trei zimni. Why do you have to write the same term 2 times in one pasuk? Haksiv bahu kra gufei ba'aspecha es ma'asach. It says in that very pasuk the phrase ba'aspecha es ma'asach. Elamai asif katzir. Rather, that other time it says asif, it's referring actually to the harvest. V'hachikamar. This is what it means. V'chag asher hu ba'aspecha es ma'asach min hasodeh. And that holiday, again, when you're gathering. So, Asif Asher Atakotzer Bo, Eino Mishana HaNechneses, Elo Mishana HaYotzes. That stuff, if you're harvesting at that time, that's not considered the new year produce, that's considered the old year. V'limed Chakana, what it's teaching is as follows. Sheketzir HaChag Holech Achar Shana Sha'avra, that the harvest that takes place on Sukkot, it's considered produce from the previous year. V'kim Luhu L'Rabbanan, and it was clear to the Rabbanan, Sha'amru HaTvua Achar Shlish, D'chol Tvua Shenikteres B'chag, B'yadua Shevia Shlish Lifnei Rosh Hashana, that we're talking specifically about grain, again, that has grown by 1/3, it's ripened 1/3 of the way, and again, anything that's been that much, that's ripened that much, we know that you're going to harvest anything that's harvested on Sukkot, we know that it's ripened to that extent before Rosh Hashana. V'kakari lei b'tseis Hashana, and we're calling it in the pasuk b'tseis Hashana, meaning she'i mishana hayotzes, meaning it's relevant again to the previous year. Al matvu achar shlish. You see, we're talking about tvu achar shlish. We're talking specifically about grain that has matured 1/3. But the Gemara continues. Amar le Rabbi Yirmiyah le Rabbi Zera. Rabbi Yirmiyah says to Rabbi Zera, v'kim lu l'Rabbanan ben shlish l'pachos mishlish. Can the rabbis really make a distinction between something that grew 1/3 and didn't grow 1/3, as Rashi over here says? V'kim lu l'Rabbanan bitmi. It's a wonder. V'chibikian hein b'tiv gidol hatvua. Are they such experts at the way that the crops grow? L'das shein hatvua ru'uya liksor b'chag, that they know that you can't harvest it on Sukkot time el imkein hevia shlish b'shana sha'avra, unless it grew 1/3 the year before. How do you know? How are they able to make such a calculation? So Amar Lei, so he said to him, Lav aminulach, have I not told you? Lo sapik nafshach levar mihilchasa, don't take yourself outside of the halacha, meaning don't question these shiurim of the chachamim, these measurements of the chachamim. Kol midos chachamim keinu, all measurements of the chachamim, that's how it works, they're exact. Ba'arboim sah hu tova, when you immerse in a mikveh, it has to be 40 sah. Ba'arboim sah chaser kortav eino yachol litvol behen, but if it's 40 sah, but it's missing a little bit, it's a little less than 40 sah, you can't immerse in that. Kebeitza metame tumas ochlin. If it's the size of an egg, it's tame tumas ochlin, the tumah of food. Kebeitza chaser shumshum. But if it's the size of an egg, but it's missing a sesame, meaning it's a tiny bit smaller than a kebeitza, eino metame tumas ochlin. So then there is no tumas ochlin by that food. Similarly, shlosha al shlosha. If you have 3 by 3 tvachim, metame medris. If you have some type of a cloth or fabric that's 3 by 3 tvachim, it's metame medris. Shlosha al shlosha chaser nima achas. But if it's missing just a little from the 3 by 3 tvachim, eino metame medris. It's not tame medris. In other words, again, the shiurim of the chachamim are exact. And the Gemara continues. Hadar Amar Rabbi Yirmiyah. Rabbi Yirmiyah then retracted and he said as follows: Lav milsi hidiyami. That which I said is nothing. Because the Chavraya asked Rav Kahana the following question: Omer sheikrivu Yisrael b'chnisasan la'aretz. When Klal Yisrael brought the Omer, when they first entered Eretz Yisrael, this is talking about when they entered with Yehoshua into the land from the wilderness. So mehechan hikrivu, from where did they bring this Omer? Where did they have the grain to use to bring the Omer? Im tomer da'ayil biyad nachri. If you're going to say that it grew in the possession of the nachri of the non-Jews, so ketzirchem amarachman. It says it has to be your harvest. V'lo ketzir nachri. You can't bring the Omer from that which was harvested in the possession of the nachrim, in the possession of the non-Jews. So the Gemara then says, Mimaidu akrivu. 1 second, how do you know they even brought the Omer at all? Dilmalo akrivu. Maybe that first year they didn't bring the Omer. So the Gemara says, Lo salkadaytuch. Don't let that enter your mind. Dichsiv, because the pasuk says, Vayochlu me'avor haaretz. Mimachras haPesach. It says they ate from the grain of the land on the day after Pesach. Mimachras haPesach achol. They ate from the day after Pesach. Meikar lo achol, but they didn't eat from before that. Meaning, tiakrivu Omer v'hadar achli. That's the whole idea. They brought the Omer that allows you to partake from the new grain, and so then they ate from the new grain. So it's very clear they did in fact bring the Omer. So the question still is, mehechani krivu. From where did they bring the Omer? So Amar Lahen, so he said back to them, again, they asked this question from Rav Kahana, and Rav Kahana said back, Kol shalohevi shlish biad nachri, if you have a situation, any grain or any produce that didn't grow a third in the hands of the non-Jew, so that would be considered that you could bring that from the Omer. It did not grow enough in the hands of the nachri to be problematic. So here already you see that there is a concept of knowing that something grew a third. That's why Rabbi Yirmiyah is retracting. That's why saying it is true. The Chachamim were able to identify something that grew a third. And the Gemara says, V'dilma ayil v'lo kimlu. Again, the Gemara finishing its proof. Maybe it grew, but they can't tell. Ela kimlu. Obviously, they could tell. Hachanami kimlu. So too over here, obviously the Chacham are able to discern when something grows 1/3 of the way. But the Gemara says, V'dilma lo ayil klal. Maybe it didn't grow at all. Aval hecha da'ayil riva ben shlish lepachos mishlish lo kimlu. Maybe we're talking about grain again that didn't grow at all when they entered Eretz Yisrael. And if it would have grown like a quarter, you wouldn't be able to tell the difference between a third and less than a third. And so the Gemara says, Lo sal kadaytach, don't let that enter your mind, because the pasuk says, V'ha'am olu min hayarden be'esor lachodesh. They only came up from the Yarden. It was the 10th of the month. It was the 10th of Nisan. If you think that the grain hadn't grown at all, so b'chamisha yomi mi kamali, you think it's going to grow in 5 days? You only have 5 days until Pesach, until when you're going to be bringing the Omer. So obviously, clearly, we're talking about grain that had grown a little bit. And so the Gemara says elamai, but what are you going to say instead? Da'ayil rivo dankar, you're going to say it grew a quarter, maybe it grew a sixth. Akati b'chamisha yomi mi kamalia. You think it's going to fully grow out in 5 days? That's still not going to work. Elamai yislach l'meimar. So rather, what are you going to say? Eretz tzvi ksivba. The pasuk says Eretz tzvi, meaning it's a land that can produce very quickly. It's a miraculous land. So hachanami Eretz tzvi ksivba. So too over here, it's possible it hadn't grown at all, and maybe in 5 days it was able to grow fully. So it's not necessarily a proof. But the Gemara continues. Maskif lo Rabbi Chanina. Rabbi Chanina asks the following question: Umi motzes amr. Can you really say, referring to the proof above, the high osif katziru, that when it says osif in the pasuk, it's really referring to things that were harvested on Sukkot? Again, the proof before that we're talking about produce that grew by a third was because we said that anything that was harvested on Sukkot certainly grew by a third before Rosh Hashanah, and that's why we say it's shaykh to that previous year, because it grew a third before Rosh Hashanah. But you can't say that the pasuk is talking about katzir, that it's talking about harvesting. But the pasuk says again, it says when you gather from the granary, meaning you're gathering basically from the threshing floor. V'yomar mar, and the master said, B'fsolas goren v'yikav hakos medaber. The master said that we're actually talking about the psolas, that stuff that you gather, that's the psolas that is not the good, that is not the high quality. You're going to use that for the schach on sukkahs. So clearly we are talking about gathering from the threshing floor, and we're not talking about harvesting. So Amar Rabbi Zeira says, Hamilsa havoy biyad. In this matter, we we had concluded the matter. We brought a good proof. Now Rabbi Chanina comes along and he throws a wrench in our proof that the proof is not good. And the word narga literally means an axe, but it's the same basic idea. In other words, this question undoes the proof we had before. Elaminolan. So the Gemara says, rather, what is the source? Kedetani, as we learned in a Braisa. Rabbi Yonasan ben Yosef, Rabbi Yonasan ben Yosef says, the pasuk says, V'yasas atvua l'shlosh hashanim. It says it's going to produce the grain for 3 years, and we'll continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Yud Gimel Amud Beis.